program is brought to you by Newsworks in cooperation with the Eau Claire Area School Board.
Everyone that is participating online, welcome to our invited guests. Maida, are we in compliance with open meetings laws? And if you would please call the roll.
Commissioner Harder?
Here.
Commissioner Johnson?
Here.
Commissioner Lyons?
Here.
Commissioner Nordine?
Here.
Commissioner Zer?
Here.
Commissioner Bika?
Here.
Commissioner Clements?
Here.
We'll now move on to our Pledge of Allegiance. We have a real first tonight. Tonight's student pledge leaders are Ryan and Lonnie, who are siblings in the dual immersion program at Longfellow. They will lead us, I believe, for the first time, saying the Pledge of Allegiance in both English and Spanish. Principal Fisher said Ryan and Lonnie were selected because they are great examples of bilingualism and are two great kids. So Ryan and Lonnie, if you would like to come forward, those of you who are willing and able, please rise and join our student leaders in the Pledge of Allegiance.
De los Estados Unidos de América y a la República representa nación bajo Dios entera con libertad y justicia para todos.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Ryan and Lonnie. We'll now move on to the adoption of tonight's agenda. I would hear a motion to adopt the agenda.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Our agenda is adopted. Next, we'll move on to our recognitions for the evening. Superintendent Johnson.
Thank you, Chair Nordine, board members, student representatives, and executive team members and guests. Tonight, I'd like to talk about the Blazing Lions. Longfellow Elementary has a morning walk-run program known as the Blazing Lions, and it's off to an amazing start this year. Students earn a popsicle stick for every lap they walk/run around the pathway painted on the blacktop at school. Our staff hand those popsicle sticks to students and families as they complete each lap, and then they drop them in the bin for their respective grade level. We count them at the end of the morning and keep track throughout the program. Family and friends earn 2 sticks for each lap, known as the 2-for-1 deal. These popsicle sticks are all added up at the end, and the top 3 grade levels earn extra time in the gym. We're about halfway through the fall program, and participation, especially from families, has been amazing. We've heard things like, I begged my parents to let me come, and I love, love, love the Blazing Lions. It's literally the best mornings of my week. So just want to congratulate the Blazing Lions from Longfellow, and we have Principal Fisher here this evening, and we'll get a quick picture with me and this. And take that right here. I'll just move right around here, Principal Fisher. I should get a popsicle stick for walking.
You should. Your family will catch his family and you get double.
That's right. Thanks much.
Our next agenda item is our public forum. Board provides those who wish to address them up to 4 minutes to address the board. The school board will not hear personal complaints of school personnel nor of any person connected with the school system in a public forum. For a reminder, for those of you participating in public forum, if you would lead with your name and address for our records, please. Our first speaker tonight is Lori Plackey-Worth.
Lori, a request to unmute has been sent to your program.
I'm sorry, what?
You can start whenever you're ready.
Okay, this is Lori Plackyworth. I live at 2229 Trillium Drive, Eau Claire. Are you hearing me okay?
We are. Thank you.
Have you ever, in your experience on the board or as educators, seen such strong opposition? I can truly say that I really don't envy any of you right now. But doesn't it give you pause to make you wonder why things are piling on right now? Doesn't it make you wonder that perhaps you could be doing things wrong? That maybe you are stubbornly clinging to things that don't work? That perhaps there's been years of bad policy? There are just so many issues in such little time. Do I begin with the decline in student academic performance in the district, or the drugs and the overdoses in our schools, or the vile, filthy, perverted, abusive books in our libraries? Maybe we should go and revisit the gender otherwise student who has been gracing the girls' locker room at North Star. Look at the sexual assault that happened at Loudoun School District in Virginia. Could that happen here? Yes, definitely. But that's okay with us because we continue putting our gender solid girls and boys in harm's way because we're afraid of a lawsuit by overzealous bullies in certain LGBT groups. Let's move on. Perhaps talk about your violation of open meeting laws by forcing the people who pay for the building you're sitting in, as well as your salaries, to remain outside. You know full well that WebEx is not working. Maybe you should talk about the ridiculous COVID protocols, which brought all of our attention to in the first place. That's actually a positive to COVID because you've awakened a sleeping giant. Most of us were far too happy these years to trust that our school boards and educators were actually looking out for our children's best interests. Finally, we woke up to the many physical and emotional unhealthy measures that were being forced on our children under the ruse of science to protect them from something that is barely a threat to their age group. At that time, we thought surely when we brought our concerns back to you with facts, that our school board administrators would certainly listen and actually get back to educating our students in the core academics. But what we uncovered seems to be something so disappointing and sinister that many hesitate to even mention their fears for worry that they'll be called domestic terrorists or conspiracy theorists. The facts are that core academics have fallen by the wayside and social re-education has taken the lead. There seems to be more importance set on teaching sex, physical self-gratification, gender confusion, racism, alternate history, and allegiance to science, but only to approved science. I know that there are some of you who instinctively know that this is not right, and I challenge you to stand up from within and defy this nonsense. Trust me, now that we are awake, we are not going back to sleep. You cannot continue to shut us out. There will be reform in this district. We will take back the education and well-being of our children. We will get back in these doors.
Sorry, Ms. Plackyworth, that's your time. Thank you. Our next speaker tonight is Lynn Danke.
Call-in user, you've been unmuted. Are you Lynn Danke? The call-in user has dropped off. We'll move to the next public comment.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Tina Schwegel.
Tina, you're unmuted and can start whenever you're ready.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
We can.
So I just want to share some of the numbers for Eau Claire County for COVID. Currently, the percentage for active cases is 0.51% of the population. That is 1/2 of 1% of the population of Eau Claire County of 106,000 people. Currently hospitalized is 0.006%. 0.006% of Eau Claire County is currently hospitalized with COVID and likely comorbidities on top of that. That is 6/1000th of a percent of the population. We have had 137 deaths over this almost 2-year span of this pandemic. That is 0.13% of the population over almost a 2-year span. So that's not 0.13% in a week, 0.13% in a month, or even a year. That is over the almost 2-year span of this supposed pandemic. So I want to know why we are still masking our children at school, covering their faces, forcing them to avoid expression. I want to know why we are quarantining healthy children for weeks at a time. And don't tell me that they're getting the same education at home that they are at school, because they're not. My son was quarantined. I work full time. I cannot take time off to also teach my child to the same extent that I can do, that the school can do and should do, because that's what you guys are all paid to do. Okay, so I don't know what you guys are doing, but these are the numbers in Eau Claire County. This is not a pandemic. You guys need to fix this and free our children. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Brian Bauer.
You're unmuted and can start whenever you're ready, Brian.
My name is Brian Bauer. I am at 4436 Old Wells Road. Okay, so essentially, the reason that I'm here is I have a daughter in the 2nd grade. She has a class size of 27. Essentially, the district decided that 1 to 2 weeks prior to school starting that they were going to cut 1 of 3 teachers, which brings them down to 2, and split the students into 2 classes versus 3. And unfortunately, they didn't give us any reason why, didn't give us any notice, didn't ask for any involvement or any suggestions. It was, as far as I was concerned, very sudden. So I just kind of wanted I sent out an email. I didn't send one out to Mr. Johnson, Superintendent Mr. Johnson, but I did send it out to the school board, as well as the principal of Sam Davey. And I did go to attended a couple meetings there as well, just to express my concerns with this. So first off, my wife and I moved back a couple years ago, and we were really excited because I had full confidence in the district. Excited because when we first got here, one of the things that you said was that you were going to put the 1st and 2nd graders first, and that math and reading was a foundational element. In fact, you invited, from what I remember, the kids to come in early. I can't remember how many days early, but you invited them to come in early because you thought it was so important to have these children gain that educational knowledge and experience in these areas of math and reading, which to me was awesome. I was super excited about that. I thought it was really important. But then this year really turned my sort of my opinion of where the board and where the educational department is going, because you can't stick 27, and originally it was at 29. Fortunately, there were a couple of students, and I'm obviously not happy that they dropped out, but it just lowered the class sizes to 27. but there would have been 29 students in my daughter's class, and that's at a second grade. And you guys said that it was foundational. The distancing things concern me because I hear all these people telling me that they're concerned about the masks mandate. And if you're saying that there's a mask mandate and then there should be distancing, and I can't understand how there'd be more distancing with a larger class versus smaller classes. So that was concerning as well. And I just don't think that the situation was handled well. I do understand that, and I agree. I think that that the interventionist is a very important position. I just don't think that that you should take it away, especially from the second graders at that foundational area. I also don't think that robbing Peter to pay Paul is a good method of operation. I think the school needs to have more aides or more folks in that area to help with those kids.
I'm sorry, Mr. Bauer, that's your time. Thank you. Our next speaker is Maggie Venable.
Maggie, a request has been sent to your computer. You are unmuted and can start whenever you're ready.
Can you all hear me? I'm on a different computer than normal.
We can.
Okay, Maggie Venable, 3409 Briarcrest Drive. First of all, I didn't get to talk to y'all 2 weeks ago. So Erin, it's great to see you back in the boardroom. So happy that you are back and with us in the meeting. So I wanted to say that. I just wanted to touch base with y'all regarding a situation at middle school on October 5th. Seventh graders were exposed to a positive student on Thursday, September 30th. Now, please try to stay with me. The children exposed continued to go to school on October 1st, 4th, and the 5th. Parents were contacted late in the afternoon on October 5th and notified that their children needed to quarantine until they could be tested at the 7-day mark, which would have been Thursday, October 7th. So I tell you this in hopes that you all will see how incredibly ridiculous this is. So these children quarantine had gone about their normal school days as a close contact for 3 days, along with 2 weekend days, right? The children who were exposed kept going to school, just like the vaccinated children. All was fine in the world, right until the school district decided to discriminate against the unvaccinated students and send them home for only 2 days until they could test negative. Then they were deemed acceptable to come back into the school building. I honestly wonder if we've lost critical thinking skills here. Like, there's absolutely zero logic that an exposed student continues attending school for 3 days, then is forced to quarantine for 2 days and provide a negative test. Clearly, if the student was going to infect others, it had already happened. And I know the answer here, we're following the CDC, the DHS, and the health department guidelines. I know that. And I understand we don't want children to get sick. I get that. None of us do. But I ask you all, at what point in time do we start thinking for ourselves? This is just one of the many stories in the past month that really makes us start to wonder what is going on. We look at Chippewa Falls. 3 weeks ago, they made the decision to go to optional quarantining, right? Parents get to determine if they want to quarantine their kids and they get to monitor their symptoms. Before they went to that, they had 559 students quarantined. As of October 15th, they have only 76 students quarantined and only 23 cases of COVID in their school districts. I know it's a smaller school district, right? So let's look at Waukesha, which is incredibly comparable to Eau Claire. Currently, they have 33 students with COVID, only 59 students with optional quarantine. They also have data which is updated hourly and listed by each school to show parents and staff the risk level based on schools. I ask us to please start thinking for ourselves in what is best for our district and our kids and get our healthy kids back in school. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Judy Olson.
Judy, a request to unmute has been sent to your computer, and you can start whenever you're ready.
Hello, yes. Thank you for having me be able to speak. Can you hear me okay?
We can, if you would start with your name and address.
Yes, my name is Judy Olson and my address is 1767 Drummond Street, Eau Claire. On September 30th, Senator Mike Braun of Indiana at a Senate committee hearing asked the Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona, this pointed question. He said, do you think parents should be in charge of their children's education as a primary stakeholder? And this was Cardona's answer. I believe parents are important stakeholders, but I also believe educators have a role in determining educational programming. Well, this is alarming because he's basically saying that parents should not be the primary stakeholders in their education. And this comes down from the top and it goes down to the local. And this is why there's so much dissent, because the school board members around the country are not listening to the parents because the schools now think that they should be the primary stakeholders. And so a lot of the dissent is over what's being taught is critical race theory and the 1619 project. These things are divisive. And I heard, in one school that, kids are asking, looking for other racist kids. And the definition of educate is to develop mentally and morally, especially by instruction. The definition of indoctrinate is to imbue with usually partisan or sectarian opinion. It's a point of view. And that's exactly what the critical race theory is, a point of view. I would just like to read you this. This is from Malachi 4, 5, and 6. It says, behold, I am going to send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and terrible day of the Lord. And he will restore the hearts of the fathers to their children and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the land with a curse. Well, we don't want the land to be smitten with a curse. And that's what God wants. He wants the parents to love their children, and they need to have that love. And then this, I want to read all of this from Ezekiel 33, 17 and 20. Now this is, there's nothing new under the sun. And this was in 600 BC that he lived. And it says, yet your fellow citizens say, the way of the Lord is not right, when it is in their own way that is not right. And God is speaking here, he's prophesying. He says, yet you say, the way of the Lord is not right, O house of Israel. I will judge you, each of you according to your ways. And so I'm saying that I know that a lot of this stuff, you do this for the money, to receive the money through the federal, through the state. But it takes heroism to stop it. And I know if you said, I'm not going to have critical race theory taught or 1619 project taught in our schools, the money would come in. I would know it would pour in. And so it's not the money. It shouldn't be the money. Anyway, I hope and I've been praying for all of you. Anyway, so it's a huge responsibility you have.
I'm sorry, Ms. Olson, that's your time. Thank you. That ends our public comment for the evening. We'll now move on to our regular reports. The first is Budget Development Committee. Commissioner Lyons.
Budget Development did not meet this week. We are scheduled to meet on the 21st this week.
Thank you. Sorry. It's some commotion in the audience, nothing major, just people moving around, and I got a little distracted. Please forgive me.
That's all right.
We'll then move to our Legislative Liaison, Dr. Johnson.
On October 15th, the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction released information on fall student counts, school district revenue limits, and general school aids for the 2021-2022 school year. Eau Claire area school district general school aid will decrease by $264,333, and that's a 0.40 reduction from the previous year, despite not seeing a change in total count numbers. We saw an increase in our 4K pre-K special education numbers, a small decrease in our kindergarten numbers, and then a somewhat small decrease in our grade 1-12 numbers, but our totals remain the same between 10,893. On October 14th, the City Committee on Judiciary and Public Safety held a hearing on Senate Bill 585, which involves reporting certain crimes and other incidents that occur on school property or school transportation and granting rule-making authority. On the same day, the Senate Committee on Education held a hearing on the following bills. Senate Bill 423, payments to an independent charter school authorized by a tribal college. Assembly Bill 420, payments to an independent charter school authorized by a tribal college. Senate Bill 555, required subjects in a human growth and development instructional program. Senate Bill 587, state aid payments for pupils in grades kindergarten through 12 who transfer schools due to the existence or absence of mandates regarding pupil face coverings or COVID-19 vaccines. School district membership in an interscholastic athletic association in the 2021-22 school year and making any appropriations. Senate Bill 608, the prior year pupil attendance requirement to participate in the Racine Parental Choice Program. Senate Bill 567, requiring school boards to report information regarding credit recovery courses. Assembly Bill 561 of the same function, and then Senate Bill 589, the Foundations of Reading Test Licensure Requirements. The Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights recently released a new discrimination resource binder for elementary and secondary schools entitled Back to School, Supporting Educational Environments Free from Discrimination. A resource collection for elementary and secondary schools, the binder contains fact sheets, Q&As, letters to educators and school leaders, and other materials about institutions' responsibilities to provide educational environments free from discrimination under the federal civil rights laws enforced by the Office of Civil Rights. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move on to the superintendent's consent agenda. For both of our consent agendas tonight, the board acts with one vote without discussion. Items on the consent agenda have been discussed at a prior meeting or the board has been furnished information prior to the meeting. If any board member wants to discuss an item, it will be pulled out of the consent agenda and voted on separately. We have one item on the superintendent's consent agenda tonight, that is Human Resources Employment Report. I would hear a meeting to approve the superintendent's consent agenda.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? On the board's consent agenda tonight, we have minutes of board meeting October 4th, 2021. I would hear a motion to approve the board's consent agenda.
So moved.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And opposed? Thank you. Our next item tonight is our regular focus on results. We have an update from our previous focus on results. And for that, I will turn over to Superintendent Johnson and Michelle Radke.
Good evening. Tonight we're going to discuss corrected data from our previous student climate survey that we presented on September 27th in the results section, the same section of this agenda. Michelle Radke is our Director of Assessment. She and I will share in this presentation tonight the survey, internal administrative discussions and results. We'll also discuss key conclusions, continuing improvement processes, and future direction after we present that corrected data. We'll also highlight key trends, replication efforts, policy implications in our planning processes, in alignment with our EMLSS model that Mandy Van Vliet and others had shared in that same September 27th meeting. So going with our first slide, just to show a little bit of the intro to this and the story. We had that presentation and we had the data that we shared with board members and the public on the 27th. And those were the initial results. We had received the data from DPI. Schools had gone over it. Michelle had taken care of the data sets for our district as well. Schools were able to look at their individual data, principals were. And after the presentation, and we all felt like this, we felt that, the next day's principals meeting, I addressed our principals group. And I just said, this isn't the Eau Claire that I once knew. And this isn't the Eau Claire that we know, and we need to do better, and we will do better. But I asked our staff, our principals, who had listened to our board meeting and had gone over that district level data. And there were a few principals who had done so, but most of them had stayed simply with their school level data. And we continued to ask questions, and Michelle Radke had reached out to a couple principals, and principals had shared things with her. And, we had those internal discussions at the school level with their own data. Things didn't match up. And Michelle had reached out to DPI and spoken with them about this. We're still determining what had actually happened, but we had received the incorrect data. Once we had received the raw data, and Dr. Bika, to your credit, when we asked about this, we wanted to find out more about the demographic data. We wanted to break it down in subgroups. So it's a credit to Michelle to ask for that raw data, and then that's when we determined this data was inverted. And now it doesn't mean to say, hey, everything's wonderful and fine, and we don't have to worry about improvements. That's not the case. We wanted to give you an update of the correct data and what we're still going to do to improve. So this, for the benefit of the audience and for the board again tonight for review, this is the old data. And I'm not going to read through it all, but the first one, my teachers make me feel good about myself. When we looked at this initially as a district level, my rudimentary math here, about 21, 22%, strongly agree and agreeing, but the rest would be disagree or strongly disagree. It's not the Eau Claire we know. It's not the Eau Claire School District we know. So what's happening? And then it goes down to the next questions as well. Obviously, in speaking more with our schools, we knew something was wrong, something was amiss. But so here's the corrected data for the entire district. And although you see strongly agree for my teachers make me feel good about myself, for example, 20%, and almost 60% agree with that as well. We really want to highlight, we want to get the orange into the blue. So we've got plenty of improvement to do. And we want to get the students who disagree or strongly disagree at least into that agree portion. So again, the board has seen this, the public sees this as well. The next slide. The one that I brought up with the principals was if I'm absent, it's the third to the last one, then a teacher or some other adult at school that will notice my absence. It shocked me and it shocked all of us when we were discussing this, but yet at the principals level, they were going over their own data. And it was shifting. So I just thought to myself, again, it's not the teachers that we know, that's not those caring adults that we know. So anyway, going to the next slide. So that's the corrected slide. Now, in the midst of a pandemic, I am proud of how our students feel about their teachers and what that corrected data, what we were able to gain from DPI, That's a conclusion I have. In the midst of a pandemic, when many of our students were in cohort C and they were not able to connect with their teachers face to face in person. And also many of our students, 2 times a week. For our students to feel that way in in April and May when they took that survey, I'm proud of that. We're proud of the data without telling you all the things that we do. We don't want to, and we've talked about this with coherent governments. We want to show you the results. We don't want to wing flap. But we do have that understanding of continuous improvement and what we need to do to get, like I mentioned, the orange into the blue. We want to have more kids strongly agree with that student climate. We're adapting our systems, and we shared that with you with the EMLSS. It could almost be a decal on the bottom with the Eau Claire School District logo, but we want to make sure that that's publicized. We got to focus on our systems first. We also need to plan with confidence as part of our continuous improvement process as well, and uncover blind spots that we might not catch, but when we're in groups of principals, whether it's at the elementary level or secondary level and with our staff, when we get to share that data with them, like our principals have been with this new data, they have not been able to get into this raw data yet. It gives us that confidence later when we're able to uncover those blind spots. And then committing to our change and what does success look like? And that's what we need to do moving forward. To be able to share what is that adequate progress. We need to define that for you as well as our staff, but more importantly for our students and their families, and determine where do we want to go from here. So I think with that, I'd like to share and transition to our Director of Assessment, Michelle Radke, for further analysis of this data that I know that she had shared with you, I believe some 65 slides worth, correct?
So after reviewing the raw data from DPI, we did an analysis for the accuracy and found out that it wasn't accurate. We started to do the correct data, to do a more in-depth data analysis to determine if there was statistical significance if the data was broken down by race and grade. Trends were discovered when looking at the data in this manner, and the data will be a start of a conversation and reviewed by various groups along with other leading data to discover the meaning of this data. It will be looked at through the lens of the multi-level systems of support to help action plan around how to improve grading our academics with social, emotional, and behavioral. If we look, there were notable trends that we found when determining if there was statistical significance. And some of these trends that we found were that 5th grade students tend to have higher values than typical for most statements in the strongly agree and agree categories. 8th and 10th grade students tend to have higher values than typical for most statements in the strongly disagree and disagree categories. And students who chose Asian for their race tend to have higher values than typical for most statements in the strongly agree and agree categories. And students who chose Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander and Black or African American for their race tend to have higher values than typical for most statements in the strongly disagree and disagree categories. Again, we will look at these trends with various groups along with other leading data to help us discover the meaning of the impacts that this has in our action plans in the future. We will look through it in the lens of the multi-level systems of support, really working on that braiding of academics and behavior and social emotional health within our district.
I guess in closing, the last slide I have, and thank you, Michelle, for that. Once again, is the principal's access to that raw data, and especially what was brought up before with those subgroups. Because we had the raw data, we were able to dive a little bit more deeply into that. Just an example of this, whether it's a principal's meetings on a Tuesday or a principal meeting on a Tuesday at the elementary level. Today, I believe we had middle school and high school with Kim Kohler. These would be perfect opportunities to then be able to share that data with them. But once again, this is the first look at it where Michelle had broken this down for the board. And we've talked about replicating the areas of success. It's most powerful when we've got 3 principals here tonight. We've got Mr. Schmidt, Ms. Schiffelbein, and Principal Fisher as well, for them to sit together and to look at the data for that question that I brought up about when I'm gone for a day, how many, I have X amount of staff, I feel strongly agree that there's an adult that's going to notice that I'm gone. Well, Principal Fisher has, outstandingly high numbers with strongly agree. And we've got Meadowview and Flynn where maybe it's not so. We can ask, what do you do? What do your staff do that you've got maybe 50 or 60% on that? Maybe we're 30 or 40. I don't know the raw data, but at least we can replicate when we all share. When Kim Kohler has those meetings with our principals, and we're able to get together and analyze the data. And then instead of all 13 elementary principals thinking of something different to do to increase, we would work together, because that's what our staff like to do. That's what they had done on Friday this past week. But it's that continuous improvement, but we can only do so when we collaborate. And that's the most powerful. And I think that's the type of atmosphere we really want to make as most positive climate and culture for our staff. And then we address the trends of concern as well. We wouldn't just focus on the best, we would focus on what do we need to improve those last two levels. The policy implications are major. When it comes to our equity in our student environment, that's OE 2 and 5, and all results. If our students don't feel safe and comfortable and cared for at school, they're not going to perform very well. So that it's got tremendous policy implications for even for operational expectations. And once again, I share with it before, it's our commitment to improvement. I was very pleased this summer with the work that our administrative team had done as a group of system leaders in going through parts of this data for over the course of basically 2 days, but especially our principals were there for 2 full days. And we learned quite a bit this summer from that team and from ourselves. And we're going to make it better even as we go on, make it more productive in the summertime this coming year in 2022. But ultimately, this was a good exercise for us. The principals who are here today, they shared their data with our district office personnel in August, where we could learn about their SIPs. They could share their action planning in certain areas of equity and ask for some assistance. So once again, that's our commitment to it. Just wanted to share this with you to kind of refocus and reconnect with the correct data. I'd like to thank Director of Assessment Michelle Radke as well, and we'll take any questions or comments tonight.
Thank you, Superintendent Johnson. Thank you, Michelle, especially for tracking down that raw data, because we may never have known that DPI had it uncoded. It feels like an Encyclopedia Brown sort of moment to find, or maybe Scooby-Doo as we pull the mask off. But I'm glad to see a more positive and something that matches more closely with family responses. Certainly the one thing that never really added up was how our family is feeling so differently from students in this. But thank you for bringing this back and giving us that update. At this point, I'll open it up to comments and questions from board members and from our student reps. We'll start with Dr. Johnson.
Yeah, well, I think I would remind School Board President Nordine that the 2 examples that he actually gave that actually dated him pretty well in terms of, I'm not pretty sure Scooby-Doo and the other one would actually be acknowledged to actually this day and age, but okay.
But 3 years old, it's in a public meeting. Y'all know now. I did watch Scooby-Doo and I read a lot of Encyclopedia Brown, and I'm nerdy enough to be proud of it. Thank you, Dr. Johnson.
No, yeah, no problem at all. Yeah, that's a little too much information. I'm just curious. I hearing Superintendent Johnson's comments. I guess I would like to see an additional focus, and I appreciate both of you guys' comments about your commitment to the multi-level system of supports and looking things through especially with the EDI lens. I guess what's still surprising, even though the data turned out a little bit more favorable, the number of categories that are above 20% in terms of disagree and strongly disagree, and knowing, actually sharing with that point that potentially those who feel strongly about disagree and strongly disagree happen to be from underrepresented groups. I would be more inclined to see if we could dive into making a shift from yellow and gray to orange. I'm not really sure to strongly agree. I'm probably some of those students are just excited to actually like go to school. I happen to have two kids that are excited to go to school. Don't know where they actually got that from because that wasn't me as a young person, but they are excited to go to school. However, though, my concern is though, there's probably a lot of things that we can potentially gather of examining that shift from that, I guess, mustard and gray over to the orange that really has to dive in, and especially knowing that potentially those students from underrepresented groups made a lot of those particular comments. And so I would, for me, it would be what can we do to potentially shift that gray and mustard over into the orange? And I'm not as concerned as it relates to kind of where those percentages lie for the blue, because I think for those particular students, they potentially have potentially a home environment and or dispositional sets that they enjoy the educational experience in general. And so that's where I would just comment and say that I would like to dive into that a little bit more. Thank you.
Representative Loken.
Forgive me if I didn't catch it. I'm really excited about having more focus on data. My question is, are there any future plans to present a report where the data is stratified by, for example, education level like elementary, middle, high, and have it stratified by the races which are not too small in order to be personally identifiable?
So that's where a lot of that data was by grade level. So that's the 67-page document. There was a lot that was broken up by the grade, but there's a lot that's out of our control with the demographic groups. We can start to super group them. So if we don't have 20 as our end value, then we're able to add two groups together to make a super group to help, paint a more of a picture with that. But sometimes it's out of our control when their end value is so small with some of those groups. So we do it as much as we can, but when we want to protect our students and make sure that they can't be identified.
I will note that the updated data that Michelle is talking about was in the executive section, so I think probably only the board was able to see it and not the public. I did have a conversation in email with Superintendent Johnson and Michelle today about making sure that that data is then made public so that people can see it. And again, with that concern of how small are some of our groups, and it's not been raised to that level to see that, but I think it can be, at least by your estimation, Michelle, and I see Superintendent Johnson. So we'll make sure that is made public for everybody to see afterwards. I think we know it's important to make sure that we have that information out there so that the public can look at it as well. But it was, in this case, then 5th grade and, by grade and race as a crosstab. Commissioner Zur and then Commissioner Lyons.
I just have a question and then a follow-up. How long has the student climate survey been done?
We did K-12 Insight probably for, do you remember how many years? Oh, 5-6 years prior to 7 years prior to, this was the first time that we've used the DPI survey. It's a very similar survey, but it's a different vendor.
So my follow-up, thank you. My follow-up is, what is the plan for showing the board the longitudinal data on the student climate survey? Because I think one of the things that I look at it is just, well, is that better? Because I know this isn't the first year it's been done. So I think, moving forward, it would be good to see, did we improve? Because I'm not going to remember next year, and I'm not going to remember what meeting we talked about it at. So I'm going to have to go back and try to find, you know what I mean? So it would be great to kind of have that data set pulled for us to see where we've improved and, what's effort and why. And so that's all.
Thank you. Commissioner Lyons, and then we'll go to Commissioner Harder.
So my question is very much along the same lines as Commissioner Zur. This is a DPI instrument, or did we create that?
It's a DPI instrument.
Okay. So not only longitudinal, but I was wondering if there's any ability to have some benchmarking within the state, since it's a DPI instrument, find out. So how we compare year over year, but not only year over year, but in regionally. So is a possibility.
Yes, that is a possibility, and we're still waiting upon those results too, the normed results from the state. So at some point we'll have them, but I'm not sure when. I have not received a date yet.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Seems worrisome as to whether we'll know whether we can put our data up against them anyway, since they've missed in at least one case that we're interested in. Commissioner Harder?
Thank you. Yeah, I had a related question about the longitudinal point Commissioner Zur made. Just in general about these measures. My understanding and sort of, I guess, assumption anyway, was that we would be focused a lot on looking at that from the perspective of growth and improvement year to year. But this is almost more of a bit of more of a meta question, I guess, for the measures that we're looking at. They will, to a large part, be cast that way, won't they? Including these, as we look from year to year, because I too am very focused on that question of how we have not a much great basis of comparison this year. We're sort of trying to establish a baseline. We certainly have past things, but they're different instruments, it sounds like in this case. Anyway, the point, yeah, so that was my question. It's about just from a governance measurement standpoint, isn't that a general strategy, growth?
Yes, we want to start to get longitudinal data. So right now we do have a baseline. We could do some looking at questions that were similar, but they had different values that were, a 4-point scale compared to a 5-point scale. So it's just different measures. So it's harder to do that. So going forward, we also want longitudinal data because we want to look back at what our trends were in the past to see if we are improving.
Dr. Johnson.
Yeah. A follow-up in terms of whenever the state data becomes comparable and the issue as it pertains to supergroups. We're doing campus climate surveys on UW system campuses as well and running into small N sizes with underrepresented groups. What would be interesting if a request could be made to DPI to disaggregate the data by those particular underrepresented groups and see is there the recurring trend not only associated with achievement gap differences between underrepresented groups, but also from a climate perspective, and then across the state. And then, so is this a particular state issue? Is it unique to, as Commissioner Lyon said, unique to this particular region? But I think if we could get, if anything else, data from for those students, specifically from those underrepresented groups, to see if that particular trend, and because then for me it's the educational environment for students from underrepresented groups as a whole needs to be addressed, and then potentially it gives an avenue for Eau Claire to potentially figure out ways to be a leader in changing and or adjusting some of those particular trends. For me, like I said, personal interest, but objectively, it really, I wasn't shocked. I was anticipating, and I appreciate your extensive 66 page presentation slide, but that last piece of knowing actually that students from underrepresented groups more than likely would have actually were going to be the ones that disagree. And so, and in places like Wisconsin, in our particular area, that information typically is actually lost in the larger picture. And I just ask that we just don't lose sight of that. So thank you.
So I appreciate the look forward and taking it to principles, and obviously it's going to be at least a little easier conversation, so that because it does not appear so dire. But I will echo what Dr. Johnson said. Move the most important focus is to move the disagrees and the strongly disagrees to agree, and really how do we make sure that we're connecting with those kids that are feeling that they're left behind. I recognize that we, need time to process this, and principals need to talk with their staffs and then with one another before we potentially decide on some adjustments. We also, we started Character Strong. I know at many of the different schools, there's different pockets in the day. At South, they call it Success, where they're working together and those sorts of things. So as those go on, and it sounds like maybe the board is in general, not only with longitudinal, which would certainly, I will expect to see a survey like this as evidence under one of the indicators when we have a report for R3 and R4, and that longitudinal report can come back around, as part of that as we evolve the results system. But I'd like to know when some of these ideas start coming out that we're going to put into place, right away. How do we move that number of 20% to a far smaller number of schools or individuals? I'd just like to hear what some of those ideas are, that looking forward, what are we going to do? What is the district going to do at individual schools or as a group? I don't think it necessarily needs to be another presentation like this, but certainly just a written memo to the board would suffice. So I just want to request, as those ideas come out, that you just send them on to us so that we know what's being done to try to move that needle. And then we'll have some idea of, what have we done over the last year and where did we land as we come around to look at it again. So thanks. Not seeing any other comments or questions, we'll move on. I'm happy to have Sarah French with us tonight as a representative of the Eau Claire Public Schools Foundation. She'll be presenting the annual report for us, kind of sandwiched right in here during budget time. Another way that the community is helping to support the district. So Sarah, welcome and thank you.
Awesome, thanks. Well, thank you for having me here this evening. I'm Sarah French, the Executive Director for the Eau Claire Public Schools Foundation, and I'm here to share with you our annual State of the Foundation, highlighting some recent growth and trajectory, as well as looking ahead to what's next. So as you know, we serve as the charitable giving arm of the Eau Claire Area School District, connecting donors with the ever-evolving needs of our schools and providing supplementary support for the classrooms in our district for things like field trips, educator innovation, capital projects, greatest needs, scholarships, and more. We love the collaborative relationship that we have with you and are thrilled that Mike or Tim or any one of you can just come to us and share what the needs are for the school year. And then we have the privilege to go out and connect with the generous people and businesses in our community to support and meet those needs. So last fall, when I had the opportunity to present to you, I shared some of the sorts of things that the Schools Foundation works to support for ECASD. You'll see those here. And I also had shared that the foundation had raised over $3.6 million in support of the district and had granted over $734,000, all in support of ECASD. This year, I'm thrilled to share some awesome growth with you. As you can see, as of today, the foundation has raised over $4.3 million and granted nearly $1.2 million in support of Eau Claire Area School District. Here you can see the grants that the Schools Foundation has awarded year over year. As you can see, we're positioned for another record year in granting, as we're at over $255,000 granted so far in 2021, and we still have over 2 months remaining in the year. Here you can see the foundation's growth in net assets over our years since inception in 2011, and the momentum gained in the past few years. We're so excited to see the energy and push for support for our schools within this community, and honored to serve as your charitable partner in connecting donors with the needs and priorities of our schools. So what are those current needs and priorities? Let's chat through a couple of them. The Gateways Project is the launching of an off-site special education center for our 18 to 21-year-old students who are transitioning out of K-12 education and working on their adulthood skills and entering the workforce and the community. As you know, the school district is funding the renovation and lease of the new space at the Eastridge Center, and the Schools Foundation is working with a dedicated committee of staff and community members to raise $100,000 to support the outfitting of the space with the necessary furniture, appliances, and more. Just last week, we were approved for a generous $50,000 grant from the Royal Credit Union Foundation for this project, an incredible investment in our students. And additionally, the Gateways is also a featured project in Eau Claire Community Foundation's 25th anniversary crowdfunding initiative, making Gateways eligible for bonus grants based on how much is donated to the project before October 27th. You can find the link to support in that celebration on ECASD's homepage under News and Announcements. The funding finish line for this project is in sight, and we anticipate student use of the space to begin in the coming weeks. Another ECASD priority that the school's foundation is working on is music access. We've seen a growing need in our schools for the many extra costs associated with participation in band and choir, like musical instrument rental, dress blacks for concerts, show choir costumes and shoes, travel for national competitions, and more. Participation in music has countless benefits for our kids in and out of the classroom. However, we're seeing some students self-select out of these activities because of those extra costs. They know that their families might not be able to afford it. And then they're missing out on those incredible benefits of music participation. So the school's foundation is working with a committee of volunteers to raise at least $80,000 to build an endowed fund to forever issue an annual grant over to the school district to support those extra costs for students and families in need. We're aiming to ensure that cost is never a barrier for any student who wants to pick up an instrument or sing in choir. As the school district has tackled the importance of eliminating systemic racism present in our society and schools while building an equitable and inclusive school community for our students, the Eau Claire Public Schools Foundation has been working in tandem to secure funding for our new Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Fund. This new fund, seed funded generously by the Pablo Foundation, is supporting educator innovation in our district for teachers and staff, working actively to promote EDI initiatives in our schools. For example, bringing diverse visiting authors and artists to our classroom. One of the first grants that we've issued for this project is Mr. Scootley at North Star applied to have an Indigenous artist come in and do a mural in North Star to give some of that representation for the North Star students. And grants for social justice classroom books and more. One last item I'd like to share with you this evening is our partnership with the district to fund summer busing. When the admin team approached us last school year wanting to try something new by providing busing for summer programming at no cost to families, we were thrilled to help make it happen. By connecting our district and foundation with our awesome partners at Student Transit and Chippewa Valley Energy, we were able to secure over $56,000 in funding and discounts to support this need for our schools and families, ensuring kids could safely get to and from all of their summer programming. So what's next? Essentially, that's up to you guys. In my monthly one-on-ones with Mike and my regular check-ins with Tim, it's the foundation's privilege to hear of the district's upcoming needs and priorities, so that we are equipped to connect those needs with the philanthropic goals of the generous donors in our community. Raising supplementary dollars to support Eau Claire area school district schools is what we do. It's all we do. So thank you for the opportunity to support our students and staff. And with that, I'll ask if anyone has any questions.
Thanks, sir. Comments or questions?
I deal primarily in warm fuzzies, so there's not usually a lot of hardball questions afterwards because we just bring you money. So
I would just say thank you for the work that you're doing. It has a tremendous impact, and as we see the various opportunities, for giving, it kind of feels like, well, how do you decide where to put your money? But we really value the partnership with the foundation and the work that you're doing, and Superintendent Johnson, your commitment to making sure that this partnership is an investment not only from the community in our district, but from our district back to you. And we we see that value. So thank you for coming to share that. It's great to see that good news, to imagine all of the things. I'm personally getting very excited about the Gateway Center being able to open and really have that impact. So hopefully we get a lot of matching donations during this time. Find the link on our website if you're listening at home, support that particular project and all those things. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for the good news, especially during budget time. We like to hear about the money coming in.
Exactly, yes.
As well. So thank you.
Awesome. All right, thanks, guys.
All right, we'll now move on to our monitoring reports. Tonight we have a first draft of R2, that is academic performance. And with that, I will turn it over to Superintendent Johnson for his presentation.
Thank you. With this first report for R2, it's been interesting. Once again, very much a team approach. Gleaned quite a bit from Michelle Radke, from Jim Schmidt, from Kim Kohler, from others. This is where, in what I've learned from other superintendents and others in terms of coherent governance, the R2, R3, R4, but especially the R2 is where the indicators and all the results for those indicators and the evidence, it gets to be a time-consuming but yet rewarding process. So it's probably a little bit different than some of the OEs that we've had, especially to start with. But we gleaned heavily from Racine and Sun Prairie, DeForest, a little bit of Chippewa Falls as well. Just a couple things to note. With the definitions I have listed under the interpretation of the first area that's shaded in blue, I think one thing I neglected to do that I will add to this are basically all the acronyms and the types of tests. Ames, Web, PALS, ISTE, you name it. I need to have a page or two just of that. So I didn't want to add something to this, but I just wanted to let you know that will be included. Because for most people, they don't understand, even those of us in education. In scrolling down a bit to R2, 1A, for English and language arts, my interpretation, and you'll see this for some of our core subjects, and then a little bit different when it comes to our encore or our elective type subjects too. We expect, and this was very similar with other school districts with the coherent governance model. We want every student to perform proficiency or above grade level in reading and writing on state assessments. And we have to have specific attention to the achievement gap. So much like we talked about in the general results component, we need to do the same for our academic departments. So for all these indicators, looking down here from 1 through 10, it starts with the reading, and then it finishes up with the writing, but we start at the very beginning. Sorry, mate, I have to have you go back to indicator number 1, the growth rate for the percentage of students in 4KK. And then as you see, if we go down those indicators, where we go through the STAR, and we may be able to share some information with STAR, somewhat like we did last year to share in the spring, where we talked about the fall into the spring growth. And then we move on to forward exam ELA assessments for indicators 3 and 4. And we're talking about our underrepresented groups again. And then we move into the high school age students with the ACT Aspire and ACT reading assessments for 7 and 8. And then scrolling down, we finish up with 9, 10, and 11 with writing. So that's the first component, would be the reading, writing, the ELA standards. Next, we go into math, into numeracy. Very similar interpretation with that subject. Moving down for that. Again, with Ames Web, with K and TSG assessment for early learning increasing each year. Much the same as ELA, kind of moving down, we're doing the early numeracy, we're looking for underrepresented groups of students. With indicator 3, our STAR assessments, same thing with in each demographic group that was stated above. Forward exam for indicators 5 and 6, indicators 7 and 8, ACT ready, or they're ready on the ACT Aspire for 9 and 10. Again, focusing on not just all students, or not just some students, but really focusing on the underrepresented groups of students. And then 9 and 10 for ACT math assessment. Next, we get into science. Obviously, a little bit different, not as much measured in earlier grades or in all grades, but the forward exam for 4 and 8, ACT Aspire Science 9, 10 ready, and then college ready for ACT Science. And then looking at each demographic group for 1, 2, and 3 above. Moving on to social studies, very similar to science, 4, 8, 10 for forward exam. Civics exam, I talked to Executive Director Schmidt about this a little bit too with our students as part of graduation requirement. Indicator number 3, demographic group for the assessments above, 1 and 2, increasing by the end of the year. Moving down into fine arts, the board values the offerings and curricula, and we expect our district to examine achievement and participation, and we want to look at those underrepresented groups of students too. Do we look at overall enrollment? We didn't want to put that in, and after a little bit of discussion with a couple other superintendents, that's not as important because we don't want the competition between, if we look at specific enrollments, well, gee, you're going to keep my program or my program is more valued because I have more students. We don't want that type of competition, but we want to share the overall achievement and that the participation based on those underrepresented groups. So we're going to monitor and report the enrollment in those courses, but we're also going to monitor, examine, and increase the achievement of all students in those courses, but with particular attention to grade distribution achievement of the underrepresented groups of students. And then with this one, with global languages, I know that in some of the other areas we talked about global languages. I just wanted to share, and I put this in red for the board, is that if we would be able to switch global to world, that's what we use in all of our literature and our course catalogs and such. And I just wanted to ask the board if we can talk about that after I'm done with this presentation, to be able to shift that just for parallelism. But again, it's very similar to the fine arts. We value this, but we also want to examine the achievement and participation based on those for the subgroups. Physical education, a little bit different there, but we still value the same. The wording for my interpretation is the same. We're monitoring, reporting enrollment in those courses, looking at the achievement, attention with the distribution, and we also added athletics activities programming for number 3. I noticed that in a couple other different districts to be able to share. Again, looking at that, we have that data, and I know our activities directors examine it too in both middle school and in high school. And we've also, for all of these, we have talked a bit about evidence, but as a result of tonight, then we can continue to discuss that more often with the evidence, starting with exec team tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Sliding down a bit more to technology. Spoke with James Martin on this and Caroline Akrovic. We value our tech opportunities. We want to examine the same, much like the others, but with the ITLS and ISTE standards, we want to make sure they're integrated into our other curricular areas. I've learned from that it's extremely integrated, where there are some questions I need to share, and I'm sorry about the indicator 111 there. That's my mistake. To be able to make sure that it might be difficult to separate them because they're so ingrained, and that was by design some time ago. But also in talking with Caroline and with James, to increase number of digital resources and our curricular resources accessed by students, and there are ways to determine that. And then the database usage for our students, as well as increase the elapsed time per usage when possible. I bring up when possible And it's a bit difficult with breaking this data down by those subgroups. We're not able to do that in some ways when we get to the evidence. We're not able to do that with the software. So it would be, I wouldn't say impossible, but extremely difficult as I look with James Martin back there. But we had a nice discussion about that in preparation for this evening. And then the interpretation for career, life, and technology education. Actually, quite a few indicators for this. Talking about career pathways, dual credits for indicator number 2, and for indicator number 3. If you scroll down even more, the participation with the grade distribution, participation and achievement of the underrepresented groups of students. And for the next one, for R22, for post-secondary opportunities that fit individual needs and goals. This was a bit different in looking at other interpretations from district administrators with some of those districts. And I switched it around just based on my experience and my discussions with Jim Schmidt and others. Is that we do value the learning inside and outside the school day, and that you value activities that allow students to be aware and prepared for their well-being. Some of this is difficult to quantify, and but we do want to provide evidence of informed choices for participation in co-curriculars, surveying, course selection, attendance data. As we know that students engage in informed decision-making, as well as the awareness and preparedness, are going to attend school at high rates. So that's why we have things like attendance data and GPA. And once again, to examine all of these with those underrepresented subgroups. So first indicator, career pathways, who participate in work-based learning experiences, should be very straightforward to get our evidence there. Increasing our students and to be able to have some past data as well, some longitudinal. The achievement of students taking dual credit courses other than English or math, and then percentage of students taking one or more dual credit courses to try to improve that. 4 and 5, attendance and GPA, as I mentioned before, and that was in the superintendent interpretation. And then scrolling down with 6 and 7, we need to look at participation of our students in activities, but underrepresented groups as well. And the final one with post-secondary opportunities with attention to our underrepresented groups of students. And I believe that's it. Thank you, Maida, for helping me place that together, and for exec team members and others who helped me with, talking through interpretation and indicators. And I'll be able to take some feedback with this initial work with our monitoring report.
Thank you, Superintendent Johnson. As we move into this, once again, this is a first draft session, so this is our opportunity to give feedback on interpretations, to discuss indicators, if there are indicators that the board feels may be missed or that may not hit the mark. If there are specific bits of evidence that the board is interested in making sure fall under a given indicator that you're interested in seeing, this is a good time to highlight it. I will note that each of the indicators there reads as compliant, but because this is a result, the metric on which the board will be, and Superintendent Johnson will be self-assessing and the board will be assessing the district, is based on, is the district making reasonable progress towards its goals? Is the district making reasonable progress towards its goals with exceptions, or is not making reasonable progress? So it's not an issue of compliance, it is, are we moving reasonably toward the stated goals? So with that kind of reminder of where we are tonight, I'll open it up for comments and questions for Superintendent Johnson. Commissioner Lyons.
I'm very excited about a lot of what's been presented in here. One of the things that's making my head swim is the effort that's going to be needed just to track and maintain the data collection of what you presented here. Any concerns around that?
Yes. Yes, I don't mean to make light of it. It's, the good thing is that, you know, for example, Jim and I, after Maida had shared some examples from other districts, Jim and I were able to talk about it a little bit. Michelle Radke especially was able to look at this, but to see some other districts and what they had placed into it, it is, but I'm glad we have, first of all, we will have some longitudinal data on this. The second thing is we do have data on this. We don't have to search it and we don't have to search to try to glean it or to try to pull it from certain places. But in looking at, for example, Chippewa Falls, they were able to pull some data sets. The thing that would really concern me that could enter into this in the future would be, let's say, common assessment data from a district level and, you know, those types of things. But I think starting off like this, and we can still present other evidence, but you're right, it is a concern, but we won't really know, and I'll inform the board, well, here's what we can do that is manageable, or we may need a little more time with this. But I think a little bit, maybe less data, but with more analysis and sharing somewhat like we talked about the results in lessening the achievement gap. I think that could probably help us, but yes, it is a concern. And we won't really know until we go through it this first time.
So Representative Berg and then Representative Loken.
So I was looking at 2.1 E and F, the fine arts and world languages. I was noticing that there's more focus on monitoring students in those classes instead of any sort of. I was wondering if it was the board's aim to increase participation in those courses, similarly to increasing the achievement in core classes.
For which one? I'm sorry.
2.1 E and F, the fine arts and world languages.
That we don't have the grade achievement for the core courses?
It doesn't mention much about achievement. You just say monitoring students.
In looking at other districts' data as well, they did not have as much with grade achievement as opposed like ABC. It was more based on board exam data and other standardized testing. But I could listen to board members for that as well. I'm just kind of going through what other districts had done.
Representative Loken.
My question is, what is your initial plan for collecting this data? Are you going to delegate it, or how do you plan to collect such a lot of data?
I think our executive team back there and others would think there's no way in heck he could collect all this data. As a principal, that was my job to glean some of it, but yes, I would be delegating that. But that's the good thing about working with this team is asking, okay, what types of evidence should we pull and for which grade levels at which time? It's we're doing some of this already with our achievement data that I brought up in August, where it's still embargoed, but we had gotten some data from our achievement data this past spring. There are pockets where we do have this. But yeah, I can't pull that. It's a good question though. But obviously Michelle and her staff would be able to help us with that and help us to analyze that as well.
My second question is about public access for the data. I know that some of this data can definitely be sensitive, but I also know that having more people with access to the data could yield interesting results. So once the data is evaluated for potential security concerns, would it be possible to create some sort of timeline for it to be made available for the public?
Well, I think part of it would be in sharing this evidence and how it's published. That could be one to inform the public. We also have our statewide testing data where we would be able to share that when it becomes unembargoed in later November. We have had some communication with DPI about some of these, but I think every piece of evidence that we pull from our own data or from statewide assessments and such, we would definitely publicize that. That would be for public consumption here, especially with our stakeholders.
Would that be in raw data form or in presentation form in PDFs?
I would anticipate it could be. No, that's a good question. I would think they would be links to where you can actually pull and make reports, custom reports based on, let's say, a DPI website. For our own data with, for example, athletics activities and different co-curriculars, that's one thing that maybe when we get to the evidence component, when the board sees the evidence, okay, should we add more to this or should we pull back, or how would we examine that a little bit more? Sure.
Dr. Bika.
I have 3 questions. So there are a number of places in the indicators where it's mentioned it will increase, for example, by the end of each year, or just will increase each year. So I was trying to imagine this when we get the monitoring reports. So first, the question is, how much? Should we expect some kind of a target? And a number of these indicators use percentage. And I would really like to see us move away from descriptive statistics like percentage, more of the inferential statistics. So societal, where you could say a statistically significant change rather than just a percentage increase. How much is expected? What if they don't increase? Does that mean non-compliance? I'm not sure. Is it possible to have, when what will increase, would you want to base predictions on some kind of targeted intervention? Perhaps in a year you expect an increase in one domain, but not necessarily other domains. Or even when there's monitor and report, would we set short-term targets and long-term targets?
Thank you.
My last question is, I'm wondering about, I thought in this particular report is where we might see some things come forward, such as like within world languages. When we committed to the Spanish immersion program, it was with the thought that that was going to expand into the middle schools and high schools at some point. And we might even add digital immersion programs. Would that be something that we would see here, or that would appear somewhere else, or not at all? And that could relate back to the question, target would be a certain, hit a certain number of bilingual students in the district. That's a way to achievement, not just return report. Or other things I wondered that they would come into this would be changes in AP enrollment, changes in gifted education, especially for, I'm thinking of underrepresented groups. And the last example I thought might come in here, but I don't know if that's appropriate, as we made the move away from a tracking system to mixed ability classrooms, that would become an indicator. But this is still me trying to figure out where we move back to those changes. Here, somewhere else, or I'm not sure where.
Dr. Johnson.
Is someone inherently biased behind the content of physical education? I guess for me, I'm not sure indicator 3, the increase in the participation of students in athletics and activity program would adequately fit within physical education, as they're 2 separate entities. And I would also hope that even if we were to see growth in athletics and activity programming, that the importance of physical education K through 12 is actually not missed. I think after we already see a reduction in time allotted to physical education and the importance of fundamental movement skills for lifelong physical activity, For me, I'm not sure indicator 3 should be there, and if it is, I guess my concern moving forward would be that we understand that it's not synonymous with physical education. It's really two separate approaches, regardless of kind of what some of our community members may think about that. And so that's just one of the concerns. Thank you.
Commissioner Lyons?
A part of me very much agrees with what Markel just said. And, I read that and I was thinking at the same time, yes, academic performance and athletic participation is much more of an extracurricular, co-curricular, although I understand the physical education component of it. I hope we don't lose a measurement of student engagement. It needs to be somewhere. So maybe it isn't here, but like music and band and orchestra and choir is an extracurricular activity that can be a fine art. Fine arts education and the participation in that extracurricular activity are both very important. And if it's not here, I hope it ends up somewhere.
Can I just interject?
Go ahead, sure.
Follow up. For me, I would say that indicator R22 under the be aware of and academically prepared for post-secondary opportunities that fit individual needs and goals. I think extracurricular and co-curricular opportunities kind of align with actually setting the stage. Athletics and other co-curricular, extracurricular activities set that stage for how individuals in this context may engage in lifelong physical activity. May be the start of actually the participation in team and our individual sports, or the love of music and band participation, a continuous process there. And so for me, if it were to be removed from the physical education piece, for me, the contributions of all the other types of learning experiences that happen through participation in sports and our other type of co-curriculars could definitely definitely fit there.
Commissioner Zer.
So I have a similar bias towards career and technical education. So in looking at R21I, I am missing a bit indicators for life readiness and employability skills. I think that they're really, if we're gonna go to the point of adding life to the description of what was traditional CTE, I'd like to see an indicator for it of some form or another, whether that's the work that's being done for finding ready or however you choose to pull it out. But and I don't know if employability skills are gonna come underneath some of these other things, or if this is gonna come in a different result policy, as it's kind of a gray area. But I know that those things, when we were doing our results policy survey work out to the community, when we were writing results policies, those things, personal finance, all those juicy words that parents like to throw around, life readiness skills, that they were big. They were big in that data. And so again, similar to Dr. Bika, I'm not sure where that shakes out, where that lands in the R's. So I don't know with life, the word life in there is like, oh, well, there's so many things that could fall into there. So those are my two contributions there.
So I also have, I think, two things. One, will echo my colleagues that had suggestions for indicators, especially the discussion around the physical education and activity, sports and activities. One of the things that you brought up in your presentation was that you didn't want to put increasing the number of students in music or fine arts as a method of because it might promote competition. Well, mine has more, so I'm more valuable. And I think when we put things like increase the number of students in sports under physical education, that's an indicator that sports are a priority to this district in a way that other activities may not be, such as a band or a show choir, or I know a bunch of kids that are in the improv club. That's a super valuable activity, and when you learn some of the tenets of improv, and this is my personal bias showing because I'm not good at it, but I'm an amateur. Those tenets help you to learn to be life ready and to work with others and to go back and forth. And so I think when it's under that physical education, it makes it seem like the only things that we value in activities is when we're playing sports. And obviously, we have a lot of students that love playing sports here. A lot of us probably participated in sports in high school. My kids don't do any school sports. They're involved in other sports that aren't offered by the school. So I think moving it maybe to a different area, like I would love to see our activities increase in our participation in sports and all of the activities, the clubs, the German club, the Dungeons and Dragons club, all of these other ones that maybe don't feel like, yes, I'm showing my bias again. All of these things. So, but putting it in there sort of indicates a value of sports are more important and physical activity are more important than these other activities that might prepare us for life and getting ready. And it's not that we don't value that physical activity. I think it's better to have it in a more generalized, life place for indicators. In terms of the data collection, I just want to share with the board that one of the ongoing conversations that Superintendent Johnson and I have been having, and I think it was Maida maybe that first mentioned it from other districts, using the results section to sort of go more in depth on the different subject areas and bringing some of that data throughout the year so that we would have, and this is not something that's set in stone, it's just a conversation we've been having about how to use our focus on results sections in a way that benefits the board and really allows us to dig into the results. So if you think about how much data we're about to get when this comes in for the first year all at once, we've been discussing the possibility of doing some of these things throughout the year. So we'll have a focus on results section that's in some ways a mini monitoring report on just the ELA. And then later at a different meeting, we'll have one that's on just the math and just the physical education and just the fine arts, and be able to potentially dig into that data. And then towards the end of the year, when we have this actual monitoring report, we can sweep all of those things together and say, we've talked about English in X month, when data is embargoed. We've talked about science data here. Now we can see the whole thing. We've had a chance to really dig in throughout the year. So that's just a possibility of a way to, and we can do that for the other results policies as well. But that is one conversation we've been having as a possibility to how to spread this data out so that the board can continue to focus on the outcomes for our students. One of our, we've gotten a few emails and some public comments saying we really need to focus on the outcomes for our students. That's one of the reasons we went to this governance model, is to allow the board to really focus on the district keeping accountable to producing, and that's why we all get into it, right? Is to produce results for our students, whether that's from the board level, the administration, all the way down through our teachers and staff. It's to help students. So that's one conversation we've been having. So we may, see our results evolve as we go forward. And I just wanted to let the rest of the board know about that conversation that was ongoing. Dr. Johnson, looks like you've got a comment as well.
Yeah, just in a follow-up, given the comments from the other commissioners, might I also suggest, in terms of kind of where it fits, where certain things fit, and potentially the reduction of indicators on this one. I think the employability, the sport participation, extracurricular. As I read R3 over, those elements of R3 would really be a great fit for a lot of these particular concerns. And the other thing, it would actually give you a lot more time, because that one's not coming until February 21st. And so I would suggest some of those that really were the comments of like, what wasn't particularly a good fit, and an alignment that suggests that potentially that lifelong personal development and growth R3 really kind of hits home in terms of employability, hits home in terms of participation in lifelong activities, whether that be sports and or other extracurriculars or co-curriculars. And, you know, I just would suggest that potentially some of those indicators that, you know, we had concerns and questions within the R2 potentially be shifted for now into the R3 and maybe serve as a better alignment. Just a suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. I think that as a reaction, I think that makes a lot of sense as you say it to me personally. So I think you'll consider that superintendent. I see I'm just going to give a chance. Any like Commissioner Clements, Commissioner Harder, anything you'd like to add? Representative Loken?
For R 2.1I, I think that it may be helpful to point out that from my personal experience, it appears that both indicator 1, 2, and 3, those aspects have been, from my experience, most utilized by non-disadvantaged groups. And I believe that they may be the cohorts which benefit most from these indicators. So in the future, would it be possible for when counselors are doing interventions with students using the data we've collected, would these things be brought up, especially the career pathways? Because these students often feel like there's nothing in it for them at high school, and they have no idea what they will do when they get out. So including these in those meetings may provide students with a much clearer path than they've experienced throughout their high school education.
Thank you.
Seeing no additional comments, thank you, Superintendent Johnson. These first drafts, I think, are working really how they were intended to, which is to give us a chance to discuss with one another, you know, what we're looking for and how to evolve this system into something that really can give us that power to monitor the district's results. And then hopefully that also means achieving results for our students. We have one more item tonight that is matters reserved for board action, and we have employee handbook modifications. I'll remind the board that under our current policy as written, what we're actually voting on is does the language presented adequately describe the changes that the administration needs, rather than our weighing in on whether or not the operational decision is to our liking. So as we discuss tonight and as we think about a vote tonight to approve or not approve for that matter, that is the language there sufficient to explain to our staff the policies of the district? So I'll turn it over to Kay at this point to walk us through them, and then we can discuss.
Thank you. Maybe we're actually going to do the other one first. Thanks. So tonight there's two employee handbook modifications for the board for approval. First is the follow-up from the emergency school language that the board originally approved back in July at the 19th board meeting. And the second is a modification of the language to match what the current practice is regarding administrative evaluation process. So both of the modifications have been presented to the Employee Relations Committee, or the ERC, for input and feedback. So the first modification is in Part 1, Section 314 of the handbook, and that's the emergency school closures. So if you recall back in July, the board approved the modifications related to the emergency school closures. However, at that time, several of the board members were concerned with the idea that all of the emergency school closure days would become virtual learning days for students. And therefore, at that point in time, you'd ask for further review to be conducted so that we could take a deeper dive into that point. So Kim Kohler, Executive Director of Administration, and I worked with a committee of administrative representatives from elementary, middle, and high school levels, as well as the ECAE President Mark Goings and Executive Director Jim Schmidt, and that committee determined the following: that for closure days that occur when there are still additional instructional minutes left in the calendar, that at that point in time, students would have what we would call a quote traditional snow day with no virtual learning that would occur, and that school staff would have a virtual learning day or virtual work day. for emergency school closure days that would happen at a point in time when there are no additional instructional minutes left to account for that closure day, then the students would have a virtual learning day and the staff would then obviously have a virtual teaching day or a work day, if they aren't an actual teacher. So the committee felt that this was positive. The first is that the traditional snow day for students and families, which was something that the board had talked about originally back in July. This model maintained a firm end for the end of the school year with the implementation of the virtual learning days for students when it was required, and that was something that families always wanted. They wanted that hard end at the end of the school year and not for it to be flexible. And then this also captured the time for staff to engage in collaborative and professional learning virtually on each of those days as well. So that determination that led to the modifications of Part 1, Section 314 of the handbook that you see in front of you. And those modifications included identifying what's expected of each position on those days, and then creating consistent language between the employee handbook and then comparing that with School Board Policy 323.3 rule. So we went through the rule, compared it to the policy to make sure that, the policy rule and the handbook to make sure there was consistent language. So you can see the chart has been added there, which determines, based on your employee group, what it was that you would be expected to do on each of those given times, if there was going to be a virtual day or students were going to be virtual or students were going to be having their traditional day. So it breaks it down into what is actually going to happen for the employee. Again, this is in the employee handbook, but there's also communication that's to go out to supervisors and employees, assuming of course that the board approves the employee handbook language. So that would be what the next steps would be, is that the communication, we have communication drafted to go out to families, to supervisors, to staff members, indicating what this looks like, what it means for them going forward. So maybe if you just want to scroll down a smidge. So then the only other part that we added was just kind of helping staff members to figure out, well, what if I really don't work on one of these days, or I can't because of whatever the emergency school closure day may be. So we created kind of a little flow chart there, an if-then type of a situation to help them understand how that looks for them. And then the next black part was already there. And then the final red part, that's just adding in language that was in 323.3 rule. That was in the rule, but not in the handbook. So we added that piece into the handbook as well. So that was the first modification. Tim, did you want to do questions on that or go to the second
Let's
one?
just do them both and then we can discuss.
So then the second modification is regarding Part 4, Section 401, which is the administrative evaluation general provisions portion of the handbook. This part came to light as a result of the significant amount of review that we've been doing regarding educator effectiveness and the overall evaluation system of employees. That happened this year due to the uniqueness of the past couple of years regarding just annual evaluations for employees due to the pandemic. So in this process of reviewing where we're at in the evaluation system and where employees should be placed, that's when we recognized that there was a mismatch in the handbook compared to what it is that we do and what the handbook said. So years ago, when administrators were able to be moved to educator effectiveness because they finally came up with an administrative model for that, the language in the handbook didn't change. And so this is just updating that piece to match what happens in the handbook for the certified staff who are able to use educator effectiveness and have been for, obviously a long time. So this now matches what it says for the certified staff. So that matches practice, it matches what the certified staff language is, and then it also coincides with the compensation plan document, which is where we had the mismatch. So changing this piece now ties everything together and everything now matches as the way it should. That's it. Any questions I can answer?
Okay, questions? Commissioner Lyons.
So, if I understand this correctly, there will be hard snow days.
There'll be what snow days?
There will be snow days.
I'm not a meteorologist, but assuming that the weather is bad, then yes, we have enough instructional minutes built into the calendar that the first several, inclement weather days would be considered snow days for students. They would not be expected to learn virtually or come in, anything like that. They would have their traditional snow day and staff would do virtual professional development during those times.
Very much appeals to me.
I knew that's what you were looking for.
So the instructional minutes on average would allow for, is it 5?
Well, we're finalizing the actual figures of that. I think there's been some changes with, the way that bell schedules have been structured with COVID. And so we're trying to make sure that we're not doing anything incorrectly with DPI now that we've changed some things. But at a minimum, I would say at the elementary, at a minimum, we have 4. And at a minimum at middle school and high school, we probably have closer to 3.
Okay. And I'm getting to my question. So when I read this, which made all the sense in the world to me, the first thing that entered my mind is being able to communicate to those parents that transitional point at which we're not doing snow days anymore. Now, because of instructional minutes, we're going to be having a virtual school day. So was there some conversation within the committee on how we communicate to the larger community that transition? And in that virtual day for the student, is it a normal scheduled instructional day just online?
So the first part of that is that there's a lot of communication about, or a lot of discussion about what that communication would have to look like as we, kind of tick away at each one of those days and get closer to when that transition would have to happen. And being very targeted in communicating to buildings and students and getting into that habit of taking your device home, taking your device home, taking your device home, because we know that that cushion is getting thinner and thinner. And then communicating to parents as well, and so that there's targeted communication that goes in the newsletters or Skyward alerts, so that families are preparing for that. And then in terms of the what the day looks like, I'll defer to Kim Kohler on that, but I know the day is not going to look identical to what it is when the students are actually in school, but Kim will be able to talk more specifically.
So I don't have the communication pulled up in front of me, but we talked about having a period during the morning where staff would have time to get things up in Canvas or Seesaw or whatever platform we're going to use. So they'll have a by X time, please have information available for students. And that would include the virtual lessons and also any virtual check-in times throughout the day. So by that time in the morning, the students would know what would be expected of them. The secondary schools will need to develop, like we don't want all 7 teachers to say my virtual check-in time will be at 2:05. So we have to kind of work through some of those details, especially with the secondary folks. At elementary, it's a little bit easier because we're really only talking, a couple of adults that meet with the kids each day. But that information will be available to families a little later than the normal start time because we acknowledge that the weather could have an impact on what teachers can do in the morning. Plus, they're going to have to pivot some of their lessons. But by mid-morning, they would have that information, and then they could get to work on their virtual learning for the day. We also want to be cognizant that some families The students may not be at home with an adult that can help them learn. So we will also make sure that we have accommodations and flexibility for those students so that if it's not happening at the same time that school normally takes place, students will still be successful.
So seeing no additional comments or questions, this is an action item or a board action item for the night. And so at this time, I guess I would hear a motion to approve. Our options could be to approve both of them in one motion, or of course we could do it individually if board members would like to make motions individually. So I would hear a motion to approve either or both of the handbook changes presented.
I motion to approve modifications to the 2021-2022 employee handbook, modification 1 and 2.
Any discussion on the motion?
Well, a point of information, we are actually, as a board, required to approve the handbook, and so we're required to approve any modifications.
Correct. That is currently reserved to board action to approve changes to the handbook. Yes. It is the handbook language, not the underlying policies of the district. They're in, but, and I think that's something that I'm going to bring up at our next, policy workshop is this a worthwhile, is just saying, has Kay properly described the policy, something that we need to do, but for now that's where we are, and that's a discussion we can have as a board later on, but yes.
So I did vote against this provision the last time it came forward because I wasn't entirely comfortable with how it was planned out, and I will be voting against it again.
Any other discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I will then call the question. The motion is to approve the changes to the employee handbook as presented, both of them tonight. Rita.
I didn't hear a second.
Oh.
Did I miss it?
That was Dr. Bika.
Thank you, Dr. Bika.
Sorry. So then we're good?
Yes, thank you.
So once again, the motion is to approve both changes as presented. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed?
Nay.
Nay. I believe that is 5-2. The motion passes. Thank you, Kay.
Thank you.
At this time, we'll move on to our final item on the agenda. That is the board debrief. Commissioner Harder, I believe you were the third member of agenda setting at the last agenda setting meeting. So I'll turn it over to you to bring us around for our self-reflection.
Okay, so we're going to reflect on, as always, on one item that we think went well today's meeting and one item that we thought could have gone better. I guess I'll start. Well, I found myself a little bit, I guess, drift with our discussion about the R2 today. That just it's in a good way, though, I think, that we kind of got ourselves into a place where it's my expertise as a parent with kids in the district is feeling a little overwhelmed, which is fine. It happens. There are topics we have different comfort levels with as just random people who've kind of come to the board here. So, but that, I think would require a more study and prep time than I had time for this week. So that's something that could have gone better from my perspective. But in general, it's great to see this rolling along and to be able to continue, we're continuing to ask fundamental questions, I think. What we're doing here with governance model, which is important to do. And I'm glad to see we're still asking those questions. Why don't we go this way?
I guess my reflection isn't just so much about today, but more of a, like the overall arc. I've been thinking about how we'll use the focus on results, that component as like the minute monitoring reports. And it helps me, you talked about, that would be a way, say, to break this particular result, you know, in manageable chunks. But then I began thinking, so I like that idea and that was helpful. But I began thinking about, is that really realistic? We would have time in the course of 1 year, because I would imagine that it will be focused on results. Maybe you want to come back and have a presentation about the outcomes associated with the Gateways program. You know, there are always going to be those, you know, those other policy kind of things. And I'm just concerned about. So my question is, I guess, how will we use focus on results most effectively? And then how will we have the time to consider everything? If it's not there, then where?
I think, from my perspective, I think we engaged in the policy discussion well, and I think we're starting to get our sea legs as far as that is concerned. I know that that's the relationship between the board and staff as we get these reports and interpret their content or future content in terms of R2, kind of in an iterative manner. But I think, like you mentioned, Commissioner Harder, you know, we're beyond the knowns for me on many of these topics. You know, I'm looking at some of our board members who have more expertise in educational pedagogy to know, are we measuring the right thing here? Because I don't know. I don't know what the options are, and so that's what I'm going to be looking forward to. Me as a board member with any of these topics is how do we know that we're being presented to answer the questions we're seeking for results? And I'm still trying to figure that out as a board member. What does that mean and how to do that? But that's more of an existential question, I guess, less of how today went. I was generally satisfied with, I think, our level of engagement on the policy questions.
Why don't we? Okay, do you want? I was gonna get to go last.
No,
I don't know. I'm really looking forward to it. I think. Well, so what has come up from you two, I think, has been kind of reminded me of one of my bigger concerns about coherent governance is the creation of these monitoring reports and the work that will go into them, the tremendous amount of work that will go into them, and how lucky we are to be sitting here with such expertise on this board. And I don't say that for myself, I say that for the other people I'm surrounded by. But and how challenged these reports could potentially be by a change in expertise of the people that sit at this table. And I just wonder how that will work and how it will flow. And it's something that I know, you know, Tim would get flustered with me and say, no, we're setting them and then they'll be that way forever. But this
is an unfair characterization of a person, and I take exception.
But you know, just like how could they change over time, and how crippling would that be to the people who have spent so much time to put them together the way that they are right now? So yeah, the flexibility of the people who sit in these seats is something that I still wrestle with. I'm reminded of.
Okay. Well,
I am glad that we had the presentation that corrected data that at a previous meeting I thought was really, I guess I would have called it sad at the time. I remember 80%, I think, of students saying that they didn't feel like they belonged. And I'm just really relieved to see that those numbers, because of coding, were incorrect. It's so a great presentation. We should really be applauding that because it's an amazing, when you re-look at that, the corrected and the previous, just to see what a sizable difference that meant. You know, on the snow day issue, I could be completely wrong as a board member on this. What my reasons for voting against it are, I'm looking at this with the lens of the community in mind and how this is going to be played out for those parents that are at home. Both of them work and they're leaving a small child behind, and how they're going to make decisions and how that's all going to be played out. And I voted against it because I just think we need to consider that. So.
Yeah, so, you know, I think the positive of this, we are, as a board, navigating, going through this, I truly believe pseudo shared coherent governance type of model, and I'm sure we're a purist as the authors had intended. My continuous concern will be is, given the comments from other board members about their uncertainty of information and what to potentially look for various aspects, and also the potential enormity of the amount of information that we particularly receive, I continue to worry that at best, as a board, we will be reactionary and moving forward and not proactive. And you know, I think when wanting to set goals and have objectives, there should be some elements of being proactive and being able to work with information that you already have and existing information, which we're far from that as we're trying to actually begin this process. So thank you.
So I think there's two things that I think we did well as a board tonight. The first, of course, is the discussion on R2. That policy discussion, especially related to results, is I think the key thing that boards need to be working on. Is how do we ensure that the district is held accountable to creating the results that the community wants. Our students are elected as representatives of the community to ensure that our students become students that Claire wants them to become. I think having that discussion went really well. I also know that one of the things that I think was started to bear out tonight is that we've been having a lot of conversation both in meetings and in agenda setting and beyond as to how does the board need to receive information? What kind of data do we need? How do we need to get it? How do our presentations look that will help us to be as effective as possible? And I know that many of you have shared feedback with Superintendent Johnson and the team. I know that we have in agenda setting and beyond that. And I think we're, you know, as Dr. Johnson asked for, you know, a narrative, a story, what are we seeing with this data? And there's other changes in the timing, the trends. That has been a work that we've all been in together along with the executive team. And I think that is both something that's starting to bear out, and we're seeing the way that we get this information change. I hope so that it becomes more helpful for the board. And the thing that we need to continue to work on is how do we get that to be more helpful? How do we need to continue to learn ourselves? What do I need as a board member to make sure that I understand what I'm seeing or what it is, or so that we can be proactive as a board to move forward? And we're going to have to take steps to get there. And you're probably right, Dr. Johnson, we're not there right now, but I'm hopeful that we'll get there because we'll have that focus in that conversation, and because we have board members like you driving that conversation to say, we need to be looking forward about it. Commissioner Zur, you've impugned my character by saying that I've set this in stone, but I think we have to look forward to, the board will be a different organism, a different set of people here in some number of years. But what we can do is we can set up and try to put into place a structure that's going to help all future board members. even when, as the community evolves and we need slightly different things, when our focus for, career changes slightly, we need a different indicator to say, are we hitting this mark? Because we have, more opportunity at community college. Maybe we need something there that dials into CVTC more closely. But as we set this up, the best that we can do is say, this is a system that we hope can work for whoever sits in this place, and recognize that those changes will come as our community grows and evolves. So anyway, I think we need to continue to educate ourselves and ask those questions. How do we need to present? How do we need to get data? How do we need to be presented data so that we can do our jobs and continue to grow? Thanks.
Yeah. Well, I would say just one quick thing is that just my experience on the board, and despite the things I said about concerns I have about how this is unfolding, I'm fundamentally optimistic about this compared to how the board was functioning in all my previous years. This is a different, the struggles that I mentioned, for example, I feel were pushed forward and highlighted in a way that I found actually helpful tonight. That lack of understanding, rather than just a sort of a general blur, which I think I felt a lot more in the past years. So anyway, that's my own experience, but I remain as cautiously optimistic about this approach.
All right, that leads us to our adjournment from the evening, and I would hear that motion to adjourn. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. We're adjourned.
This program was brought to you by a cooperation between Newsworks and the Eau Claire Area School Board.